Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Artisan Pirate here, and welcome back to the Model Train and Nostalgia Room. In today's hopefully fun video for you guys, we are going to be talking about more recent books that I have read. Now, it's been a while since I've done a video like this. I told you guys that when I was going to do book review videos or talk about books that I had read, they would not be as frequent as some of the other videos that I post over here on the platform, because it does take time to read books, and I am by no means a speed reader. I like to take my time with the books and soak in all the knowledge and take in the atmosphere and everything, so to speak. But I've got 8 more books in today's video to talk about. I want to try to give out minimal spoilers, so hopefully it'll encourage you guys to go out and try the books for yourselves. All of them are by the author Stephen King. I am slowly working my way back through the Stephen King collection that I have. I have picked up more here recently of his books that I missed back when I was reading. But back when I began reading, of course, Harry Potter series got me into reading, but then I morphed into a full-fledged Stephen King fan, and I read a lot of his archive back then, back when I was younger in my teens. But since I've picked up reading again, I've wanted to go back through that whole entire catalog, and I've just been kind of jumping around. I haven't been following like the year that they were released, and you're going to really be able to tell that in the books that I show you and talk about in today's video. Now, I do have a cheat sheet here with some dates and everything written down and some notes, just so off the top of my head I can give you guys the best information as possible. But I've had a lot of fun reading. It is so therapeutic to read in the afternoons, just to unwind and mentally escape in the pages of a book into a different character, into a different mindset for a while before going to bed, and hopefully getting a good night's sleep. But really, really cool. Got a nice cup of coffee here in the Klingspor Woodworking Shop insulated coffee cup here. We are going to begin with The Talisman. Now, The Talisman was co-written by Stephen King and Peter Straub. This is the cover of it. It is a nice hardback book, and you can see it does have a good length. It was released in 1984, and it follows the story of Jack Sawyer. He has to go on an epic journey in the pages of this book to save his mother's life. Now, his mother is trying to escape their Uncle Morgan, who's trying to take full control of her late husband's company. You learn through that whole story what happened throughout the pages of this book. Again, I'm trying not to give too much away here, but Jack finds friend and solace in Speedy Parker. Speedy Parker is a very well written character. He is an older black man, and when you meet him in this book, started to say movie, but when you meet him in this book, he is the custodian and janitor and repairman of the theme park where Jack and his mom have ended up in the local hotel, and Jack in his wanderings runs into him. So it's really cool to see that relationship form, and Speedy informs Jack of the territories, the alternate world, the parallel world adjacent to our world that we live in. Keep in mind, this was written back in 1984, but he tells Jack that he is going to have to flip into the territories and go from coast to coast. Lily and Jack have escaped to the East Coast from California, but now Jack must make the long trek all the way back to California, and Speedy specifically tells him not to fly. He can only walk or hitchhike, and since the territories are smaller, he can walk farther in it and flip back to the American side, if that makes any sense, and go quicker. He teaches him how to flip with the help of some cheap wine, but through the pages of the book, Jack learns to flip without any assistance. But Jack begins the quest to save his mother's life. He learns of the term twinners. People in the territories world has an alternate personality. Not everyone has one because it's a smaller world, a smaller populace, but Jack learns that he is a twinner. His mother Twinner is actually the queen of the territories, and she is also sick because Jack's mom in the real world, in the America world that he lives in, is also sick. But Speedy tells him if he goes to the other coast, to the Dark Hotel, he can get the talisman, and it can save his mom's life as well as the queen's life in the other world, because Morgan Sloat, Uncle Morgan, is also trying to take over the territories. Jack's dad early in life showed Uncle Morgan how to flip over into the territories, and he was fascinated by the power of magic, mythology, and the stuff like that. Keep in mind, the territories world is kind of Amish based. It's very old world. There's no electricity. There's no vehicles. You know, it's very much horse and buggy, but magic also exists in that world as well. So keep that in mind. Very good book from start to finish. I do feel like there was some parts of this book that was drawn out way too much, and it kind of made it a drag to read in parts. I hate to say that about a book, but it is what it is. The Oakley Tap, where Jack takes up work to get some money to continue his travels, I felt like that went on too long. And also the Sunlight Home also, I believe, went a little bit too long, but it filled up a big chunk of the book. And going back through it, it wasn't as boring as I remembered. Going through the Blasted Lands toward the end, towards the climax and final fight of the book, I felt like that journey was a little too long and drawn out. Along the course of the book, Jack runs into Richard Sloat, which is Uncle Morgan's son, and he actually forms a bond. They've had a bond with Jack, but they have kind of fallen out. They reconnect and continue the journey to save Lily and the Queen's life in the territories. And you also meet the character Wolf, who is a werewolf and befriends Jack. He knew Jack's father when he was in the territories, but Wolf is one of the most very well written and actually sad characters once you get to read in the book. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but I had fun going back to this. I had read this book a couple times back in my childhood, again when I was reading, and it was great to revisit it. It was kind of like revisiting old friends. But I reread this book because I wanted to finally read the sequel, which is Black House, released in 2001, and it is also co-written by Stephen King and Peter Straub. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right, but this takes place several years later. Jack is now a retired police officer, police detective, and he tries to retire to the town of French Landon. Again, I'm trying to look here, but at the nursing home, there is a sinister man there who is a cannibal, and Jack is brought right back into his line of detective work, and he must solve the case of who is abducting the local youth. And again, it is a cannibal you're dealing with, so please be aware of that as you read the book. This book here is detective based, and I never read this back when I was originally reading. I was not interested in detective style novels, but I heard on social media that Stephen King was writing book 3 of The Talisman. Again, The Talisman was the first one. Black House is the second one. So I really wanted to read it because once Stephen King gets going with a book series, and especially co-written with Peter Straub here, it really takes off. The thing is, this book here took about 60 pages to really get going and to grab my interest. I kept turning the pages, hopefully thinking it would pick up. You know, I'm like, all right, what's the next page I'm bringing? What's the next page? But it finally picked up, and once it finally picks up around the 70, 75 page mark, it never lets up from the rest of it. And it is confirmed that in this book, the territories is part of Midworld, where Roland the Gunslinger in the Epic Dark Tower series takes place. And Speedy Parker is also, in a roundabout way, a gunslinger like Roland in the Dark Tower series. So it was really cool to see all this. Along the way, you have the Thunder 5 biker gang that helps Jack, the adult Jack, along on his way. You have the meddling, the very meddlesome Wendell Green, the reporter who's trying to report everything and sneak around town and get all the information he can. And then you have also one of the most very well written characters I have ever read in Henry Layden. He is the blind DJ, and he has actually got different names because he's DJing for different radio stations, and he has these different split personalities, and he makes friends with Jack, and he's one of the most well written characters that I have ever read in a book, and I just liked his personality and everything. But with this book, you follow Jack as he tries to solve the case and rescue the final youth that the cannibal had abducted, dubbed the Fisherman, who's a copycat of one that happened back in the early years. You know, he's a copycat person of the same cannibal, but a really, really good book once it picked up and started going. Again, released in 2001. And then after I read those two books, I took the dive into a book I had but was always put off by the length of it, and that was it. I went to the local McKay's and we picked up a nice new edition. The one I have is a small trade paperback, and the print in it was very minuscule, and it's over 1,000 pages long. This copy here itself, we'll check here real quick, is over 1,100 pages long, to be precise. So you can see a massive volume here. And it took me around 3 months to read this book from start to end. I didn't rush it. As I said, I like to enjoy it. And when I got done with it, I actually didn't want the book to end. You know, as big as the book is, it is so well written. It was written back in 1986, so 2 years before I was actually born. It takes place in Derry, Maine, as the group in this book fights Pennywise the Clown. So really cool. I'd never seen none of the movies either, because I always wanted to read the book before seeing the movies. I've seen the new 2-part modern movie. I have not seen the original miniseries movie yet. If you guys have, let me know if it's really worth going back and seeing it. I heard that it was more loyal to the book than the newer adaptations. But this one here takes place in Derry, Maine, and it follows the Losers Club. Now, the Loser Club comprises of a group of outcast kids that don't really fit in anywhere else in the world, and they form a close-knit bond and are called the Losers Club. This book also takes place in 2 different timelines, and Stephen King masterfully combines both the past and the present when you jump back and forth throughout the book. Now, I normally don't like that when you go back and forth with the timelines. You know, if you go back to then you go to now, then you go back to then. But he is such a masterful storyteller, that it is well worth it, and you really don't even notice the transitions from where he jumps around in the timeline. But the part of the book when they are children takes place in the late 1950s, and then when they come back to Derry, Maine to fight Pennywise and hopefully put an end to him to good. They did put a temporary end to him back when they were little, but when they put an end to him for the final time, the book takes place several years later in the early 1980s. So please be aware of the time frame and what you're going to read about in a book like this. There is some controversial scenes in this book, and there is just warnings I want to let you know about when you read this book. Some scenes that might be uncomfortable to read, so just take that for what it is. But a very good, very well written book from start to finish. My favorite characters in the Losers Club was Ben and Beverly. A lot of people like Stuttering Bill, who is the main character, so to speak, of the book. But his character was kind of just bland to me in a sense. I really loved Ben, who grows up to be the architect, and I loved Beverly, who a lot of people say could be a gunslinger if she was in the World of the Dark Tower series. Those were my favorite characters. And throughout the course of the book, you have Mike, who is the only one that stays in the town. The rest of the Losers Club moves out. Mike is the only one that stays behind. He works at the local library, and he keeps tabs on Pennywise and things happening. And through him, you learn the history of how often Pennywise the Clown has terrorized the town of Derry, Maine, and keeps his power, and how often he comes back. Well worth a read. Finally glad I read it. Of course, you have the traditional school bully of Henry Bowers in this book that likes to terrorize the Losers Club, but a great read from start to finish. Again, it took me around 3 months to read it. I am no speed reader. Again, it is a massive volume, even in paperback format, but a very well-written book by Stephen King, and I'm glad to have finally read it from start to finish. Now, after reading that book, I didn't want to read a volume as big as it. Again, Stephen King writes some massive books. Some of them exceed 1,000 pages, just like it. So I picked a smaller book that I had in my collection for a long time but never read, because again, it didn't interest me. But now that I'm wanting to go through all of the catalog, of course, I want to try to read each and every book that the famous author has put out. And this here is Dolores Claiborne. Very underrated book in the King fandom, in my opinion. A very cool book. You can see her standing over the well, which is a huge point in the book. But this book was released in 1992, and it follows the testimony of Miss Dolores Claiborne. She's been accused of ending the person she's taking care of. She's a housekeeper. She's accused of getting rid of Miss Vera Donovan, and Dolores has an abusive husband, Mr. Joe St. George, and he is just very abusive to her and also to one of their children. So just be aware of that. But it's written from the viewpoint to where Dolores answers all of the questions. You never, as far as I can recollect, I read this back in early summer after I finished it, of course, but as far as I can remember, there's no response from anyone else. Everything in this book is from Dolores's point of view as she talks about everything. But a very good book. There's also the eclipse. You can see that behind her in the cover there, and that is an event that is built up throughout the whole book, and it plays a major plot point in it, and it's got a very cool twist ending, in my opinion. So a really good book, and I'm glad I read it, and it wasn't that long, and I kind of breezed through it in about 2.5 weeks, which was really refreshing after taking so long to read it, but really cool. And then after that book, I wanted to go back where it all began for Stephen King back in 1974. I reread Carrie. Now, Carrie, I've had this forever. This is my original copy of Carrie. It was his original release, and what really put him on the map as an author of the horror genre in the big wide world of literature. But this one again was released in 1974, and it follows Carrie White, who at the very beginning of the book is an outcast. She's picked on by her classmates. They are constantly picking on her, teasing on her, but Carrie has telekinetic power. She can move stuff and make stuff happen with her mind. And throughout the course of the book, it is built up, and her power grows and grows as she slowly becomes more unstable. She has the uber religious mother, Miss Margaret White, who deems everything that everybody does other than herself naturally a sin. So just be aware of that. But throughout the course of the book, it is peppered with articles from newspapers and like doctors' things talking about the Carrie White case, because ultimately Carrie loses control and takes advantage of a situation at prom night to get her revenge on those who have teased her throughout her whole young life. But one of her classmates takes pity on her and wants her to feel like a proper student at the school, and she asked her prom date to take Carrie to the prom, and it all goes smoothly until one of the classmates that really does not like Carrie plays an awful trick to her. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. The book is very well written, and the movie was also very good as well. Speaking of movies, after I read Dolores Claiborne, I went and watched the movie. We went and watched the movie on the TV, and it was fantastic. It was kind of a little bit different than the book, as all Stephen King's works are when you go from page to the screen, but it was a very good adaptation of a great book starring Miss Kathy Bates, a phenomenal actress. I remember her, I think my first exposure to Kathy Bates was her playing the unsinkable Molly Brown in the famous Titanic movie, but Kathy Bates plays the starring role in this one. And I also have now watched the movie Carrie to go along with this, but again, this was Stephen King's very first work as an author in the horror genre that was published and widely received, and put him on the map as a horror writer. Again, a very good book, not very long at all either. Now I want to talk about the next book I read. I wanted to read something more modern from Stephen King. I went all the way to the beginning, and I actually began Carrie on the day that his latest book, at the time of this video's recording, released. His newest book is called Never Flinch, and I actually began Carrie on the day Never Flinch released on store shelves. But after finishing Carrie, I wanted to read something more modern by Stephen King, so I opted to read Duma Key, released in 2008. And a lot of people on the Stephen King fan sites that I'm on talk about that this is the appropriate summer read. So it was in the heart of summer when I started reading this book, and it was so phenomenal. I can't believe I waited so long to read this book. I did not want this book to end. It follows Mr. Edgar Freemantle, who is a very wealthy construction site owner. He has a construction company that builds buildings, banks, and things like that. But he has a freak accident to where one of the cranes on the construction sites backs into his truck. It crushes his head. He has massive brain trauma. He also has, he loses his whole arm. He loses his right arm. And during the recovery process, his mood shifts, his marriage deteriorates, and then his therapist finally just tells him, look, because Edgar was on the verge of ending it all because he just didn't know what to do, where to turn to, and it just goes to show that being wealthy is not everything, but he didn't know where to turn to, and his therapist recommended, he said, look, if you're at this point in your life, what I recommend is you going to a new town, pick up a hobby you picked up before your construction company took off, and just give it 1 year, and if you feel the need in a year do whatever you need to do. So Edgar goes to Duma-Key, Florida. He gets a house called Big Pink. It's called a different name by the others, but he dubs it Big Pink, and he takes up drawing. He begins with like colored pencils and crayons and things like that and little simple sketches, but he quickly evolves to using pastels and not stencils, what are they called? Canvases, canvas portraits and everything like that. But what slowly starts happening is his portraits start taking on another life, in a way that only Stephen King can bring to the pages. And I'd love, love, love to see a movie adaptation of this. But it takes place in Florida. He also starts taking what he calls his great beach walks during his recovery process, because the wreck at the beginning also messed up his hip. And he slowly makes his way down to the next house, which is more like a palace, where the elderly Miss Elizabeth Eastlake lives, and she has Alzheimer's, but she also knows more than she is telling, which you learn throughout the pages of the book. And then you meet another one of my favorite characters that I have recently read and is so well written, and I was just a joy. It was just a joy every time he came up in the book to read his part in the story and everything, and that is Mr. Wireman. He has a lot of quotes, and when you're reading through Edgar's point of view, he'll say something and he'll be like, or at least that's what Wireman says. So a very fun character to dive into in this book as well. But Miss Elizabeth knows some of the dark past of Duma-Key, and through Edgar's paintings, the portraits start coming to life in a roundabout way, and ghosts from the past start showing up on Duma-Key. And again, it's a story that only the masterful storyteller Stephen King can bring to the page. And again, this one was released in 2008. Now, this is the final actual novel I have read, but there's two more books I want to show you here that tie into Stephen King, because while I was reading this, I finally dove into Stephen King's The Dark Tower Beginnings, the complete graphic novel Sovel, and you can see here that this here is a massive volume here. It has some beautiful, beautiful artwork in it, and it has the first 5 stories in the graphic novel series, I believe. I got the original comics, and I'm still looking for all of those comic books released by Marvel, I believe it was, but this gives you more story to the Dark Tower. If you read the Dark Tower series and you are just craving more of it and want to know more about the world, more about Roland, especially book 4, a lot of people really love book 4 because it tells of his youth and his original quartet, his original group of friends. So a lot of people wanted more of that story. This fleshes that out and tells the whole backstory from where book 4 ended up to the fall of the original gunslingers, and then Roland the Gunslinger's ultimate quest to find the Man in Black, to where the Dark Tower Book 1, The Gunslinger, picks up with the iconic sentence, "The Man in Black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed." But again, a very cool read. It is the comic book style, so I know that might not be everyone's cup of tea, but if you want to know more about the backstory of Roland and you just want to have more Dark Tower knowledge, I highly recommend this. I read this in here in the train room in the mornings. I'd read at least one chapter, one comic issue a day, if not more, because it was just so fascinating to me, because I had read, I believe, the first half of it, and I kind of fell out of reading then, so I never got to see how those original stories ended. I now finally got to see this, and I read this in between reading the Duma-Key book, and then when I finished this one, here is another one I have, and this is Stephen King, Peter Straub, The Talisman, Volume 1, The Road of Trials. And this has, I believe, the first 6 comics, and sadly, they discontinued it. Right when the comics was getting good, the comics actually end when Jack meets Wolf. And again, I said when I was talking about The Talisman that Wolf is a very well-written and tragic character. Once you read The Talisman, you'll see what I'm talking about. But it was cool to kind of see some visuals from the world of the territories and how they interpreted, the artist for the comics interpreted how the characters should look. And if you like the book The Talisman and Black House, I would recommend getting this. These also came out in single comic issue. I don't have those comics. I wasn't even aware of them till someone mentioned it on a Stephen King fan site. But I found this one at the local Ollie's for $4 as U.S. currency. So it was really cool to have this and read that. Again, I read those 2 graphic novels in between reading Doom McKee, so it was a nice refresher, you know, to kind of pepper in something different. But that is the most recent books I have read. I'm also reading stuff now going into the fall. At the time of this video's recording, I'm reading the appropriate fall and Halloween and spooky Stephen King book, Salem's Lot, that takes place in Jerusalem's Lot and is about vampires. But once I read about 8 to 10 more books, if you guys want to continue seeing videos in this format, I'll be happy to hop back on here and give you guys a quick review. If I have inspired you guys to pick up one of the books that I have talked about here, please let me know down in the comments below. And also, if there is a book or book series, I really love reading a series because I love to have characters develop and things evolve, and you just get to know the characters kind of like family. If you guys know a book or book series that you think I would enjoy, again, you kind of know what I like to read now, please also let me know down in the comments below. But that's about all for this video. Hopefully you guys found it fun and enjoyable from beginning to end, and hopefully I did not bore you guys just standing here talking about recent books I have read. But if you're new to the channel, hopefully you'll click that subscribe button and follow me across all my social media feeds under the Artisan Pirate name. As always, links to contact me as well as all my social media feeds will always be linked down in the description box below these videos. That's about all for this one, and remember guys, if I can make it or do it, or read it, so can you guys. I'm the Artisan Pirate. Take care, and I'll see you guys real soon.